I'm now delighted Strand 2 talk given by Lise Bell. Lise is an international education consultant with over 20 years experience as a teacher educator, working with teachers and early career trainers in a wide range of global contexts, including Southeast Asia, Latin America, Australia, the Middle East and North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Western Europe, and North America. During Lisa's talk, we recommend you view in speaker view. And if you have any questions for Lise, please type them in the Q&A box. Without any further ado, over to you, Lise. Please share your screen.
Thank you, David. And I just wanted to say, while I get this set up, I just wanted to say congratulations to the YLT SIG on their 35th anniversary, and that's been 35 years of amazing support that you've been giving to young learner professionals. And thank you very much also for organising this conference along with your team, and to ELT Consultants for sponsoring it so that it could be free to everyone. Okay, so let's start. I'm Lise Bell. Thank you very much for that introduction, David. And my talk is Who Needs a Parachute? As David said, I've been a teacher educator and a young learner teacher for many, many years now, in many contexts around the world. These are just some of them on my screen. I've been lucky enough to work with lots and lots of very enthusiastic teachers and teacher educators, and to learn from them, and also get lots of experience about lots of education reform projects for younger learners. So in my talk, I want to talk about two common models which I've experienced in teacher education programs globally. I want to describe what they are, and also talk about some issues that I've experienced, and through my own experience, through talking to other colleagues with these types of interventions, and make some suggestions of ways that we can perhaps make these teacher education programs more sustainable, contextually aligned. Okay, so first of all, the first of the two types of model I'd like to talk about is parachute training. So this is, as it says on the slide, when a group of teacher educators drop into a context for a very short term to deliver pre-prepared materials as part of a training program, and then leave at the end of that. The other is cascade training, where training is given to the top of the pyramid. And the idea is that this training will then be reproduced throughout the various levels down to the grassroots level. Okay, these two models often work together. You often find them both in the same kind of teacher education project. So these approaches are very popular for two reasons, mainly two main reasons. One, they're a very time-effective way of getting teacher education through to a large audience, and also because they're they're very cost-effective. However, I think there are limitations with both of these approaches, and as we are in a position now where, because of the pandemic, we're in this phase of the new normal. I think many countries are looking for new directions, new ways of meeting these sustainable goals. Sustainable development goals for education. And I think it's a time to actually look at critically the impact of these two models. How effective are they, and how we could maybe do better with these models. So I'd like to start with my first issue that I've experienced. Dr. David Hayes identifies 5 key criteria for delivering a cascade training model. I'll just give you a minute to read the slide. I will give you the link to this downloadable booklet at the end of the session. I would like to talk about these areas and also expand on them and add some suggestions of my own. Okay, so the first area I'd like to talk about is imported or homegrown. In many countries around the world, there seems to be a belief that somehow bringing in a group of experts from outside is much more valuable than working with teachers in our own country. And I think that is problematic. I think often when we have course designers coming in from outside, they don't actually have the full picture. They may well have an idea of what's needed in the context, but they don't really understand the realities on the ground. And a lot of the problem is that the interventions are very much top down. So these things are discussed at levels of the ministries of education, training providers, materials developers, and they're not actually coming from the bottom. So that's something I'm going to talk about in a second. I also think that in terms of budgets, flying in experts is obviously expensive. And now after the pandemic, I think funds are a lot more limited than they were before. So I think this is something that we need to think about. So some of my suggestions for ways that we could maybe do this better are, first of all, we really need very, very broad-ranging, strong needs analysis. I think, as I said, the interventions tend to be very much top-down, whereas I believe, and Dr. Hayes mentioned this in his criteria, that we need a greater range of voices. There should be consultation with all levels, including the grassroots, including the teachers, to find out what their expectations are, what their needs are. And I think it's very, very important that when the materials are being designed, when the courses are being planned, that they are very, very well aligned with the curriculum, and they meet the expectations of all the stakeholders. So the teachers, all the participants, the teachers, the stakeholders, everyone. So I think, and I think that can be done by involving more voices. Obviously, I think the process maybe take longer, but I think it's worth it. Second area that I wanted to talk about is sustainability. In my experience, I found that a lot of these models tend to be short, intensive interventions. The interventions may be repeated over a period of time, but often with different groups. And I think the issue with that is that they often don't lead to sustainable teacher development because they feel like a bit of a one-off rather than part of an ongoing program. I think that they're not standalone. There should be more follow-up that's embedded into the program, people going in, observing classes, etc. And I think for teachers as well, they maybe think that this is, they come for a week, they do the training, they enjoy it, and then they go home and do exactly the same as they were doing before. So I think there are two ways that we could address this issue of sustainability. The first is by being accountable ourselves, including formative monitoring and evaluation at various stages of the project. On many of the projects I've worked on, there has obviously been monitoring and evaluation, but it's often at a very basic level, and it's not necessarily repeated to focus on sustainability. I think, again, it's very, very important that we collect feedback from a variety of sources, and that a variety of participants are included in this process, including the materials designers and the trainers, so that there's feedback about how appropriate these materials were for the context they were being used in. And the other thing I think we need to act on this feedback. I think sometimes that, it's part of the process that we ask for feedback at the end of the course, but then nothing actually happens with that feedback. And I think it should very much be formative. The feedback that we get should then feed into subsequent phases so that they can be improved, so that they can really meet the needs of the participants. The second way that I think we can have greater sustainability is by empowering local teacher educators. We can do this by fostering communities of practice, such as teachers associations. For example, Mali TEYL is one teacher organisation that I was reading about recently. We also have different groups of teachers, and I think it's very, very important. They know the context, they know the realities. By putting more focus onto them, I think we make it more sustainable, because they are on the ground, they're there all the time. And I think the way that we can help with this is by supporting them to develop their own solutions based on their own context, rather than relying on suggestions that are coming from outside that may not be actually appropriate in that context. They know the needs of their teachers much, much better than, I think, a group of international trainers flying in on a very, very brief course. I think this has been problematic before, because it's obviously it's expensive to have this kind of support going on when we have to fly people in to do it. But because of the changes now, these moves to remote learning, we've got options like Zoom, WhatsApp, Telegram, where we can provide more ongoing support for these communities, so that we do encourage them to develop their own solutions with their own teachers. So those are the two ways I believe that we could make it more sustainable. Moving on to another area, one size fits all. In my experience of working on these teacher education projects, I find that they're very standardized. The materials that are being used are the same. They're designed to be delivered across a country to many, many groups of teachers. And as a trainer, I've often been told that we want the training to be the same for every group. And I think that's partly to do with wanting all the teachers to get the same, the same input that they throughout the training program. However, I actually think that there's a problem with this. I think that even though you have one country, the diversity of needs across a country can be immense. For example, you've got different levels of experience of the teachers that you're working with, or the teacher educators, the context, there might be limited resources. Obviously, without overgeneralizing, often we find that the cities have a lot more technology, maybe rural areas less, although I do think we've got to be very, very careful about stereotyping with this. I've worked in some rural communities with some amazing teachers who are extremely motivated. So I don't think that we can, say that one is better than the other. So I think this is problematic, and I think these standardized materials don't address this diversity. And in fact, they actually will possibly marginalize teachers, because things maybe won't work in their context. I also think it's really strange that we, as a teacher, when was the last time you went in to teach a group of learners with a pre-prepared series of lessons without having ever met the group, and then never changed them? You taught the group, but you didn't actually change the materials. So I think that there's a lot of issues with this. So again, my suggestions are, I think we need to be looking much more at bespoke programs, tailor-made for the context, so that the materials are not what we think they need, but they really are what the teachers need. And this links back to this doing more research, finding out about needs analysis. And I really, really strongly believe, I've been coming to this conclusion over the past few years, is that we need to be moving away from a standardized approach to a more training unplugged. I don't know if you're familiar with the term training unplugged. Unplugged is about basically working with the voices in the room, the people in the room, rather than going in with some pre-prepared materials. And I often find as a trainer that I don't have time when I'm delivering these training programs. I don't have time to talk to the teachers and find out what they need, what challenges they face, to really interact with them. And I think that if we actually put more focus on that and allowed more time for that, I think that we could adapt the materials. Most of the teacher educators who will be involved in these programs are extremely skilled professionals. They will be able to adapt on the spot to the situation in the room if they're given the time and they're allowed to do that. Okay, so the next area that I wanted to talk about is something which David mentioned in his plenary on the first day of the conference. He was talking about the copy me model, which, if you weren't in his session, basically it's a model of training. And this is often very common with the cascade training, because with cascade training, you're hoping that the people, the teacher educators or the teachers that you're working with, will reproduce your model. So they will copy the trainer and they will reproduce that to other groups of trainers. And I think, and then again, something David mentioned in his talk, well, it was actually Sophia Mavridi that mentioned this. She was talking about, in terms of teacher development, the need for teachers to go deeper, to really think about their practice, to think about what they're doing. And I think the copy me model doesn't necessarily encourage teachers to go deeper and to really analyze their practice and what the needs of their students are. Some teachers may not be able to adapt this model. They can see it for what it is, that these activities, but they don't see that when they go back to their own classroom, they need to make adaptations based on their situation, their context, and the learner's needs. And this is, again, something I've been thinking about over the past few months. I feel that this copy me model is often based on lots of demonstration of practical classroom activities, which is really good. I'm a big fan of demonstrating classroom activities. I think it's very relevant. But I do feel that sometimes there's a danger that we're giving teachers and teacher educators the impression that lots of fun activities demonstrated make a good lesson. And I actually think there's a lot more to it than that. As a skilled educator, we have reasons for doing these activities. They come up at a particular time because they're needed at that particular time, because they're fulfilling some kind of objective. So my suggestions in relation to this are, I think we need to be really underpinning our training with principles. I think demonstration is great. I think it's very, very strong visual message, but I do think that at the end of it, we should be having a reflection stage where we discuss the learning objectives, why we did what we did, how it fits into the wider scheme of a lesson, for example, and how encourage the teachers to think for themselves how they could adapt this to meet their learners' needs. And I think a discussion about that, I find I do this a lot with my on teacher education courses. I think that it's really valuable because it does encourage teachers to go deeper, to see, it's just about us sharing with the teachers our rationale for doing things. And again, relating back to another talk in the on the first day of the conference, Patricia Harries was talking about evidence-based teaching. And I think it's very, very important that when we're designing materials, we really need to think about the latest developments in ELT, so that we are using best practice, current best practice. And I think it's good to encourage the teachers to do this as well. By modeling this, we may encourage teachers to also research, find out what is best practice. As part of, I think, nearly all the teacher education projects I've worked on, there's always a strand of reflective practice, and that is an excellent thing. But I think sometimes it assumes a lot. It assumes that these skills are already a part of the educational culture that we're working with. And I think that's not, we shouldn't really take that as a given. It may well be there, but it may not. And I think if it's not there, then we're wasting a huge opportunity, because it's just going to go over people's heads. I don't think you can say to teachers, write this in your teacher journal, if they don't really know what a teacher journal is, what the purpose of a teacher journal is, what kind of things they should be writing in there. So I think, first of all, we really need to find out at what stage of the process are these the people that we're working with, how familiar are they with reflective practice, and then adapt this to suit them. This may involve actually modeling the processes with teachers. And obviously this takes time. So we need to be able to build in time for reflection and discussion, so that these, if the teachers or teacher educators that we're working with aren't familiar with this kind of practice, that we can show them how to do this. So hopefully they will then continue to do that in their own teaching. Right, now, I've been talking a lot about what we as teacher educators can do, but I think this is a shared responsibility. I believe, again, referring back to David's keynote talk, he had a beautiful Venn diagram, which had the fact that which said that we need to combine structured training and feedback with effective self-guided development to be able to have effective improvement. And I think one of my favorite sayings is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so I think we do need to get teachers on board with upskilling. And I think we can do that in a number of ways. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think we need to think first of what the challenges are. And I'm just going to show you that slide because I'm sure that you're all familiar with the kind of things. I mean, from Alex's talk this afternoon, she was talking about a lot of these issues. And I said, especially post-pandemic, the extra stress that has put on teachers. So I think we need to understand that these are issues. However, how do we deal with that? Because we can't do this alone. We do need to share the responsibility. So my suggestions would be, I think it's important that we frame teacher developments as a self-guided independent process in which this intervention is just part. This is not something that we just do for a week and we have a lovely time in a hotel by the beach, whatever the location is, but it actually needs to continue afterwards, and that needs to be built into the program, as I said earlier. We need to find ways to encourage teacher buy-in. Now, obviously, that's a huge topic and it would depend on the context, but I think it's a very, very important thing. If the teachers aren't on board, then it's not, the teacher education is only, what we give as the training is, or the teacher education input is only a part of the picture. Having said that, I have talked about this in another conference, a previous conference for the YLT-SIG, and in an article that I wrote for them. I think it's very, very important that we are aware of the challenges that teachers face and we understand them. But at the same time, I think we also need to encourage them to experiment and to believe that we can change. There are a lot of things stacked against change, but it is our responsibility as educators. We do need to try to give our students the best possible chances. And I think to do that, we do need to sometimes do the hard things. Okay, finally, not quite finally, I wanted to talk about education reform at all levels. In my experience, I've often found that while I'm training teachers, or the people who are observing them when they go back to their classrooms, the supervisors, the inspectors, who've often been in their job for many, many years, they're not included in the project. And I've had teachers say to me, yes, but you know, our inspectors don't do this methodology. And I think often that makes teachers afraid to try new ideas. What if they get a bad evaluation? What if they lose their jobs because they're not doing it the way that the inspector wants it done? So I think it's really, really important that when we are designing these teacher education projects, we need everybody who's involved in that process of teacher education to be on the same page. And I think, you know, we need to find ways to include everybody so that it's not just the teachers that are being given this new methodology. It is being encouraged, it's being reinforced by the people that are observing them on an ongoing basis. And I think this may well have to be something we build into our programs. Okay, and I just wanted to leave you with one parting thought. I think we really need to think about the kind of teacher education that we want to be serving. What is it we want to offer? Do we want to offer something that is standardized, cheap? It is what you ordered. It's always the same. Or do we want to be offering fine dining, something which is high quality ingredients, adapted, it's prepared, it's served according to individual preferences? It is going to be more expensive, but it tastes better. And so I do think we need to think about it in terms of the teacher education that we want to provide. David mentioned it again in his keynote speech. He talked about the quick fix or the long haul. And I think that's another important message that we need to leave this session with. Okay, I think that's me done. I don't know if there are any questions it doesn't look like there are any questions in the Q&A. So I stop. Oh, sorry, I just wanted to show you, if you do want to read more about some of the things that I've mentioned in the talk, there's a downloadable booklet from the British Council. This has got some very interesting information about, including those criteria that I showed you earlier, and also information where there's evaluation of different projects, which I think is very, very informative. I also have included here the link to an article that I wrote based on a talk I gave at a previous YLTSIG conference. And it's about how to guide teachers to help them develop, but while at the same time encouraging them to take responsibility. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate you staying on till the end of the day. I realize it's been a long day. I hope I've said some things that were of interest. Certainly very passionate about my topic.
Thank you so much for this useful talk. Your thoughts and your insights, I think, were so relatable to educators and teacher educators, and with your metaphor giving us some food for thought. I think there are a couple questions in the Q&A. Ellie Murphy's asked, curious about time and money spent by schools on publisher and ed tech company-based teacher training. Has this increased since COVID?
Time and money spent. I'm afraid I can't really answer that question, as I'm not really involved with ed tech or publishers. I'm terribly sorry. I'm afraid that's one of the questions I can't answer. There's another one I might be able to answer. How to work on teacher beliefs. I think working on teacher approaches and beliefs, I do think it's a more long-term thing. I think we need to maybe build in time for that in a project. And I think often a lot of these projects that I'm talking about are very, very short term. A lot of the ones I've been working on recently are maybe like 5 days. Personally, I think in the short term, if we are working on these copy me models, one way I just try and do it is I include a reflection stage at the end of when I'm demonstrating activities. It means I can't do as many activities, but I can sit with my teachers and talk about, well, why did I do this activity? At what stage of the lesson would it come? What do you think it's practicing? Is there anything else it could practice? So I tend to kind of build it in on a very small scale way in the training that I do. But I think if you want to do more fundamental stuff about teacher beliefs, you might need a lot more time for that. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that connection to teacher reflection is a really important one, right? If we look at over time, teacher growth and being able to encourage those levels of reflection, right?
I think also asking a lot of questions as well. I've found that more and more I use a lot of questioning when I'm working, say, for example, on CELTA courses, Delta courses. I do encourage the teachers to maybe look at course book things and say, why do you think that's there? Why do you think the author is doing this? What do you think they hope the students will get? And I try just to kind of get them, a lot of it for me is about sharing my own thinking. There's a lot of thinking that goes behind me choosing an activity and demonstrating it, the steps that go into it. I often try in my training to show the steps that I've gone through, and then get them to think about why those steps are in that order, so that they're not just copying, they actually can copy and understand why it's there. So that but I think there's also still work to be done on teachers having the confidence to change things. And maybe that's what they can be helped with, that by the teacher educators that they're working with, the people who are going in and observing their classes, by encouraging them to have more dialogue with the teachers and talk about share their thinking. That may help on a more long-term basis.
Yeah, I love this notion of even doing a think aloud with your own teacher reflection process to encourage other teachers to take that process, not necessarily copy your exact way of thinking, but to encourage that process of reflecting on one's teaching. Well, thank you so much for your insights again. And now we are going to take a 4-minute break.